Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John's reports for the 11th of March. Well, I've shrunk the chart down quite a bit just so you could get some perspective on what we're talking about. So we go back over here into late November, beginning of December. We started getting these positive extreme histograms. And those showed up like the beginning was right about here. Then we ended up with a retrace of those when we got our little DOC spread, and that came down and produced this dip below the red line, which produced our little dotted lines, which was our expectation that on this whole run-up, which was QE4 or 5 or 7, depending on how you want to version it. I mean, not official, but this is when they started pumping the repo market. And you can see all the positive extremes because they were just loaning money free to hedge funds to keep buying. And it worked. And then we started to reach a couple of soft spots. This one really wasn't one because we had the steel coming from down below so far. But then when we came back up and crossed back below at the same time, rejecting there, this one was a little bit more viable because we were on lower histogram, as you can see, and below the plus 15, so all that was starting to look good, and they still were able to turn it around with the dip below the orange and the green right over, and it's like, okay, pushed it a little bit, but at that point, we were already seeing virus issues. I was already starting to talk about it, and then right through here, I was saying, hey, it's time to get your married puts together if you want to hold on to a position. I know people object to that because it's like costs, and I'm like, okay, but you could sell calls on it as well. In the money, we had our projection, which would be to start filling back the positive extremes, and there were several of them. A lot of the mid ones have been filled on this dip right here, but this was also a dip below the red line, even though it had already been satisfied. Still left the bigger one. So this is where, market interference can create hyperextended moves. So what does that say for us right now? Well, all we did was fill back the repo pump, so to speak, right there. And the only real descent we've had is the move back down to the October dip below the red line, which was right here. That's now become resistance on the dip that just took place, which is really just a move back down to this 27.35 previous dip right there, filling in that one. So there's a reason for why we stop at these particular spots and then hit them and stop again, because that's because they're the resistance going back forward when you move below it. So pretty clean, straightforward. I don't consider any of this panic per se, but the reality is that I don't care how much fiscal stimulus you throw at this. This is a pandemic. People have changed behavior. You can see it in the streets in America. It's certainly in the streets here in Italy, where you can't even go out in the streets, so that's a whole different issue. You don't recover from that overnight. I don't care how much money you can throw it. I know Italy's suspending mortgage payments for people and stuff like that. I mean, great measures, but from a company standpoint, profit-wise, no. Airlines are going to be decimated through this, and just the whole ripple effect throughout industries, not to mention the oil situation. So is there a reasonable discount taking place? Absolutely. The devaluation of the dollar, however, helps sustain it because they will buy it. Now, we can see the NASDAQ was always much stronger. I mean, from the early pump in December, we had the dip below the red line at the beginning of December, which we just filled. We have a previous one from back here, but it had already been filled with the dip that took place on higher extreme. And this just shows how important it is. And, people have said, well, why is it so significant to keep track of these? Because they become great markers, especially if we're determining profit and loss potentials on trades and what we expect. So even here, when we dip below and we started this pump, I said, we expect to have this low return. And people say, oh, it makes you seem like a genius when it happens. No, it's just been predetermined. This is exactly what they set up, knowing full well what they do. Now, we can't control whether it goes to the 38 or 50%, but that's usually about where it ends, unless something really bizarre happens where there's just this massive carry through. But in this case, rolled over pretty quick and did what we call a spider, a little bit slow on it, which is where, comes up and then immediately retraces. And that usually creates a spike. That this wasn't that dramatic a spike was kind of a warning to us, because if we were going to get a severity move, you would see the spike like this of the orange when we get into these disruptions where we get it shooting above the 13.5. And then a lot of times on the bullish ones, you get the immediate dip all the way back down below. So it becomes a huge shoot up and then big down. And that's, kind of like what you see right here in this particular case. So that the second phrase is muted, just an indication that there really isn't a panic, so to speak. From a euro standpoint, of course, we knew that we had the blue line here, which was the bottom end of the range, and central banks were going to worry and start to get involved. And boy, did they get involved, and it didn't hurt that the U.S. numbers started skyrocketing. And the reality is the U.S. doesn't have any containment on this virus, and anyone who thinks otherwise and keeps claiming that it's less than the common flu or is just foolish. If you can't see what's going on in Italy with a death rate over 8%, and you can't even determine that death rate because it's nonsensical, because there's still people sick. So fine, you know how many people you've tested that have become positive and how many have died to this point, but that's not the death rate. Reality is you have to know how many people have recovered before you can start doing that. If you look at recoveries to death, you don't want to do that. Not pretty at all. And so Italy is quickly reaching its point of saturation as far as hospitalization capability. And that will exacerbate it, because see, this is the problem. When particular regions get affected and you only have a certain number of hospital beds, your mortality rate is going to go up, because you can't take care of those people who need to be on ventilators or respirators and ICU care, which is a small percentage of the population. I mean, again, in Italy, you're talking most of the people who are over 60 years of age. So the vast majority of people are going to be fine. That said, it's still a major impact, and people have really altered lifestyles, and that is the more problematic aspect. It'll be interesting to see here if we start to see a pump back up from oil. This wasn't, given the amount of the decline in it, not a ton of distribution within that selling. Just a single dip here of the extreme, and we're already back above it. That actually bodes a little bit better for oil, because maybe the U.S. is actually going to do what I said, which would be to buy up that supply to maintain it, because it's the only thing that's going to save the shale industry in that, and then that becomes a strategic element of importance. Whenever you have sell-off there, you're going to see gold have a little bit of pressure, because sometimes people have to revert back. Now, it was interesting, you had that huge pump yesterday, and it literally sold all the way off. If we go to the 5K, I mean, this is where we're at currently. But what's funny is when I put this one up in front of, this is the 5K, same chart, but working with the extended no steel reset, because we find with that no steel reset that you have a great deal of power in recognizing these crossovers of the steel. Now, I don't have all of the crossovers built in, because I'm just going to, the plan is merely to add this into the deal campaign 2 so that we would get it, because this one is not going to turn green for real dips. I just turned off the negative 13.5, wanted just to see what it would do, and it gives you some of those little false ones that take place there. And it's only registering that green because if green over red, orange dip, and cyan is above, steel is above cyan, but you didn't get any crossover. So, yeah, I know. It takes a lot of details to cover to match everything. But back to our regular deal campaign. If we look at the day, I think I went over most of it on our Skype chat, call by call, in real time, and we talked about as these things were happening, particularly when we had these extended periods of no reset, then we would get it, and boom, in this particular case, cyan under green, and that led to the takeoff. And yes, we still get DOC spread, but in this particular case, we're looking at a situation where you've got steel under the negative 13, which is effectively it coming from above, which would be weak, but as soon as it gets above the negative 13.5, I'm looking at, okay, when do I have actual buy signal? You get a lot of consolidation now. In this particular case, what I like to do in those is if I get weakness in between, I'll start adding a little bit, particularly if my extreme histogram here is not showing additional red bars, magenta bars, which would be below the -60. I'm just looking for the first shakeout turnarounds, and boom, and then in this particular case, that's the crossover of green, so we knew that one was going to be pretty decent and still consolidated in between the algo levels, but then completely shot up. Now, again, similar situation here where you have the BKs coming in with the DOC spread within that setup, but here above magenta over the 15, not usually going to fade just yet. You're looking for this lower histogram reading right over here, and literally as soon as you had this setup where you're below, I know gold hasn't crossed below magenta, it doesn't do that till over here, but anywhere in between there. And what I love about this range is you're between the 100%, the 76%, right at the long algo, in this particular case from the algo LNS test program. And at that particular point, it gives you an excellent range because you have a much smaller new high stop level if you want, but it also means that when you get into the consolidation and you know you're going to get it, usually you'll get like this dip. They make an attempt to back up at that particular point. There's no buy going on in that particular spot, despite the fact that you get the crossover. You've got no yellow above magenta, and so trying to buy into those kind of configurations is only going to cause you grief. In fact, I don't even know why that's it's literally right there, boom, you cross back over, you're already decaying within that, and the shakeout is not even changed one bit, which is why the paint bar stays completely red through that. This should be mentioned. Sometimes you forget to change the colors. It's okay. And that led to, well, where we're at right now, which is the current cascade. But it is a good point, though, because even if you did want to go with that dip below orange long, it'd be a little suspect with the fact that you're below the red line anyway, and the fact that you don't have shakeout yellow above magenta, because that's really what you're looking for to show that you've had at least an attempt at a turnaround. You still would have had the cross back below, and it still kind of maintained itself, which was interesting because this was just a general decay. Which is sort of one of those where you're just not getting any support whatsoever. And then when we get the orange candle, of course, this one comes because of the dip and the spike there, but you never had any reset. You still don't have any reset. In fact, well, actually, we just got it right now. So that's our first indication of a DOC steel reset below the red line, and that was a pretty decent run all the way down there. Slightly above the 50%. What it is we've had falling Morganacci 100% lines, which is drawing price up to that, so who will catch it first? We're just going to hit right in between these 28.30s. Now we're off 40? I don't remember where my entry was on this one, because I was playing with it in between 47 range. So that was up here when we were breaking down into the after hour point. I had already closed out a few others, which, why not? It's just too alluring when we get it so easy within these calls, because we can just look to this and say, okay, this is more of a short move. Boom, when this crosses back above with this steel spike, it's like, okay, that's a long move. It's still sketchy with that dip back and forth, but if you just wait a fraction until that magenta, the yellow right here, about to cross the magenta, does so right here, so that becomes your effective buy even towards the zero line, because that's your first indication that you've turned the corner. And boy, from that entry though, that was excellent from a long. You still took a little heat. The close was at 83.50, and then the next bar drops to 78. So 4 or 5 points, and then it shoots up. And of course, this is what happens with longs. They come up, and then you see them retrace quite a bit, and you think, oh my God, it's all over, and then they spike it up, and that's where we can see kind of maintained itself throughout most of the run up here on the shakeout, and then we started the new run, but no dip below the red line, which was much more the bullish. And I look for that when we're going into these kind of dips, because if I don't dip below the red line, then I know that they're just doing the little fill back for the next leg up, your effective ABC. Long and short of it, all good action. We'll keep at it. Like displaying some of these things in real time so you can see how it's going and really get an understanding of why it does what it does and how complex it is to deal with some of these unique situations within the programming and adjusting of the pink colors. So, as always, trade well. We'll talk on the Skype chat.